Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Aside from my podcasting duties, I'm also a sports collector. And as such, I'm very pleased to share the exciting news that the Sports History Network has partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autograph sports collectibles. So as a collector, I was very pleased when I visited the site of Rochester Sports Autographs. The massive inventory is easy to search, carefully documented, and visually appealing. The options seem limitless, whether you're looking for an autographed baseball, signed football helmets, or basketball jerseys, among thousands of others. I found everything from a Babe Ruth autograph, a signed football by Dick Butkus, and an autographed Larry Bird basketball jersey. And as a collector, you'll be delighted with the very competitive pricing on JSA authenticated products. Made possible since RSA deals directly with athletes, so there's no extra markup, and the savings are passed on directly to the customer. Perhaps you're looking for an early gift for Mother's Day or Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your own sports collection, right? RSA even has film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you need to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. That's shoprsa.com/SHN to get your own piece of sports history today.
Hold on to your caps because we're going in the Wayback Machine, back in the era when ladies had big hair and leg warmers, the year Michael Jackson's Thriller came out and CDs were invented. It's 1982 and the baseball is great as the teams from St. Louis and Milwaukee meet in the World Series, and we have author Jay Daniel joining us, who wrote the book Suds series, to talk about this series and more of pop culture 1982 and baseball in that same year. Coming up in just a moment. Hey, this is Darren Hayes. You've probably heard me on the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch. Well, welcome to my journey of learning more about sports history, and we're going to do it by learning about the great athletes and the uniforms that they wore, as they both tell a lot about the games that we love and have watched so much throughout most of our lives. These are the chronicles I'm going to share with you on what I've learned through my journey in the Sports Jersey Dispatch. Hello, my friends of sports history. This is Darren Hayes of the Sports Jersey Dispatch podcast. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your place for all things great in sports history, and welcome to another edition as we go into some great history of the games that we love to listen to and watch and observe and read about. And today we're going to be talking about America's pastime, the great game of baseball, and in particular, a couple of teams from the 1980s that fared pretty well, but we're going to go on a little bit deeper history than that. We have a great author on today. His name is Jay Daniel, and he wrote a book called Suds series, Baseball, Beer Wars, and the Summer of 82. How many people remember 82? It was a great year, a great decade to live in the 80s. We'll bring him in right now. Jay Daniel, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thanks so much for having me, Darren. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Jay, been looking forward to this for a while. First of all, I want to thank you and your publisher, the University of Missouri Press. You sent me a copy of the book, and I got a chance to read it. And I'll tell you what, it is an excellent book, and we'll get into a little bit more detail here. And I really enjoyed it. But I guess before we get started here, we'd like to learn a little bit about you. First of all, a little bit about your background. Maybe tell us, how you came to enjoy the game of baseball to the point of writing a book on it.
Well, I grew up in Southwest Ohio in the 70s and 80s, near Cincinnati in the Big Red Machine era, and I was a huge Philadelphia Phillies fan at the time. I was I'm going to say.
Wait a second. That doesn't go so well together. How's that happen?
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think I've always said to people, my mother grew up in Philadelphia, my stepfather grew up in Pennsylvania, and so when you're 7 years old and one of your parents likes a team, it's either a reason to root for that team or a reason not to root for that team. And so I became a huge Phillies fan right about the time in the mid 70s when they were starting to get really good after many, many years of being terrible. So, so I was a huge Phillies fan. My first book was called Finally. It was about the 1980 season. And then I did this one about 82, but I've just always been a huge baseball fan. I mean, I followed all the other sports as well. I mean, I think we're all, if you're running multiple podcasts, you were a huge sports nut like I was too. But baseball has always been my passion. And I think one of the things maybe that got me so involved in terms of learning about it was that I couldn't play it. I was just terrible. I couldn't, I was a pretty good T-ball player, Darren, but then, once the ball started moving, that's when I started to have difficulty. And so I just, wanted to read everything that I could. I'm an only child, so spent a lot of time alone. I'd come home after school, watch Cubs games during the afternoon, and then Braves games at night on WTBS, and read the sporting news and baseball digest and all those things that we had back then. And I just really became passionate about the game and still am.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I can sympathize with you. I don't think they had T-ball when I was little. I think we had like a dad pitch to us when I was real young.
Sure.
But ball was placed pretty much up on a tee for you when the dads are pitching to you. And then when you have a competitive pitcher pitching, they're not putting the ball in the same place, especially the youngsters
really
that can't control it. And of course, when you're a kid, you just want to swing at everything. So I wasn't very good either. So I had a similar path of enjoying sports, and better to be from the sideline and enjoy them than trying to play. And
exactly, but you don't get hurt that way either.
That's right. Especially when you're poor at it, like I was. So yeah, interesting. Now at least I see how you became a Philadelphia fan. I live in Western Pennsylvania. I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So I have seen quite a bit of the Philadelphia Phillies and the Cincinnati Reds, where you grew up. So those two red teams on either side of Pittsburgh, I know them both very well, and remember, the Phillies team of the 80s was a pretty good team. You're right. So I can see why you root for them. Jay had this great book on this 82 season, and, to pardon my pun, but you threw a couple curveballs at me. I came into it, I read the book by its cover, and I guess everybody does that when you're reading something. You're seeing, this and the summer of 82 and Suds Wars. I had a pretty good idea what it was. It's going to be about that World Series of the two beer towns, St. Louis and Milwaukee. We'll get it out there. But your curveballs that you threw at me. First of all, the introduction of taking me, the reader, down that path of the history of sort of the St. Louis Cardinals and the Milwaukee Brewers and their life through beer salesmen and grocers and that. I was blown away by that, and I was really a delightful little start to the book, and it really set me on a path to really enjoying it. So I thank you for that. What was sort of your inspiration of starting it like that?
Well, I mean, this was called, I certainly didn't coin the phrase Suds series, right? I mean, that was thrown about at the time. And so, I mean, I think it's easy to do, but I mean, we wanted to, and I worked with my publisher and we wanted to, and my editors, and we wanted to talk about, let's set a basis for this thing. And it wasn't just the fact that, oh, wow, look at this, there's two cities, because their beer is brewed in other cities as well, And so, I mean, if the 79 NLCS, right? We could have done a Sud series with Iron City and Wiedemann or whatever it was, or Hudipole. So, I mean, I think it was important to sort of lay the foundation and talk about the fact that these cities were basically built around breweries. And the other thing it gives me is an opportunity to continue that thread throughout the book, instead of just saying, okay, well, here's the base and let's move on and talk about who hit 3 home runs or whatever it was, So I kind of keep revisiting that throughout the book. And I think that made it fun. And it was also easy because in 1982 was when Budweiser released Bud Light, although they called it Budweiser Light at the time. And so that made it an easy transition and something else to talk about as well. And one of the things I love to do in my books is to talk about pop culture and about what else was going on in the world, or at least in the country at the time. Because at the end of the day, I'm certainly not breaking news when I write a book that says that the Cardinals won the World Series in 1982. So And anyone who's interested in reading it is obviously going to know that as well. So I want to tell people things that they don't know, and also bring people back to that era and put people in that era. And that was one of the big things that I'm a huge 80s guy across the board. I love the music. I love the movies. I love, all of that. And so I want to put people back in 1982, because at the end of the day, if you want to find out who won the games, you can go to Baseball Reference and look at a play-by-play and find out what happened.
Yeah.
And so I want to really put people back in that era. And that's what I try to do with the books that I write.
Yeah, you definitely did that. I mean, I got, you caught me with that little bit of history on, especially the St. Louis with Christopher Vanderhaw, and so that whole story would be in the grocer and everything, which was very, very interesting in the introduction. And so I said, okay, I got the rhythm of this book a little bit. I see how he's writing this, so the bring up that baseball analogy of reading your book a little bit. I was sitting on that curveball a little bit. And then you threw me a screwball, because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I think you were talking about Metallica. And I'm like going, wow, Enter Sandman is coming. I'm like, wow, I'm familiar with that. I'm an 80s kid, and just your references to pop culture, like you said, especially in the 80s, of and Pac-Man and John Belushi and countless others that you did. You really took me back down memory lane and made me connect to the story, and then reminded me of what happened in the baseball world on that day or that period of time. So that was very refreshing too, and very entertaining.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, and again, one of the things people say to authors is write the book that you want to read, and this is what I'm passionate about. I mean, there's a guy, and I talked about this often when I do interviews. There's a guy whose Twitter bio is, he said, "I don't have 80s nostalgia because I refuse to believe that the 80s are over." And that's the way kind of I look at it. I mean, I still listen to 80s music all the time. That's my happy zone, I mean, and you can call it nostalgia, rose-colored glasses, whatever. I'm fine. If you want to criticize me for it, I'm fine with that too. I really don't care. That's where I like to be. And that's not to say that I don't pay attention to what's going on now, but I mean, I love being back in that era. I love going through the old newspapers and finding all these little things and finding little nuggets. I mean, it's the hunt that really excites me, of trying to find something. Oh, wow, that's an amazing little factoid. And then I try to tie it to something else. And in terms of the pop culture stuff, there was a lot of stuff that we ended up having to cut out as well, just because it didn't really fit. It was sort of stuck in. I mean, Diner came out in 1982, which is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie. Fantastic cast. But it just didn't fit. It was kind of just shoved in. And so that's why, again, where some of the beer narrative came in, is it becomes that thread throughout the book that kind of ties things together, at least on on the edges.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it. Like you said, you have the beer story going throughout, the general theme of the baseball story, that which you're really telling about, and all this 80s pop culture and Americana. It was really well done, and I appreciate you doing that, and thank you for doing that. And I think the listeners, when you get an opportunity to get your hands on this book, and we'll give you the information on that in just a moment, I think you will enjoy that too, and really have a surprise. And I'm not spoiling too many surprises for you, because you'll enjoy it no matter what. And why don't we take that opportunity right now, Jay, if you could, let's give the title of the book and where folks can get their hands on a copy of it.
So it's called Suds series, and it's about the 1982 baseball season. It's available, obviously online on Amazon, and also through the University of Missouri Press's website. Anywhere else, you can order it from your local bookseller as well. And I'd really appreciate it. It was a passion project. I mean, these first two books that I did were something where it was really things that I was really, really into and really excited about. And so like I said, I enjoyed the hunt. I enjoyed digging and trying to find things, and, talking to people. I spoke to Doug DeSensei and Dick Perez too, who did the artwork for those Donruss cards, and talked to them about some things that were kind of interesting. Got some great stuff from DeSensei that I was really happy with. So it was a lot of fun.
Very cool. And folks, if you're driving or at the gym, don't have a pen and pencil to write down where to get the book and the name of the book, don't worry, we have in the show notes of this podcast, we'll put some links on there to where you can get the Jay's book, both his publisher his Amazon. We'll get you directly to that to help you out here, and any other links that we talk about here. So no worries. The main theme is these two teams building up for this World Championship, the World Series in 1982, and you really go back and time, a couple years of, the grassroots of these teams, of the stars and the managers and what's going on with them. And maybe if you could just give us sort of the, a little glimpse of what, how these teams were built.
Sure. I mean, I think, and I actually have, I have a blog as well. And I did a blog post a while ago where I wrote about the fact that the most important day of the 1982 season was, I believe it was June 8th of 1980. And that's the day that the St. Louis Cardinals fired Ken Boyer and brought in Whitey Herzog. And Herzog came in and completely reshaped the Cardinals roster. I think he made something like 63 player moves between the time that he took over the team in 1980 until opening day of 1982. But in the process, he also remade the Brewers roster and ended up trading. I mean, the thing that's really amazing is that he traded away the 1981 and 1982 American League Cy Young Award winners and then beat the team that he traded them to in the World Series. And again, you could make, if Raleigh Fingers is healthy, maybe there's a different outcome, and if Pete Vukovich is healthy, maybe there's a different outcome, and that's a valid argument. But on the other hand, maybe not. I mean, we'll never know, right? But I mean, it was really amazing to go back and look at how Herzog came in and just completely rebuilt that team. Basically, it was, a version of the Royals team that he had in Kansas City, where he built the team around the ballpark, and we saw the kind of success that he had with the Cardinals over the next 5 years when they go to the World Series 3 times or twice, right?
Great story. I never really thought of it in that context, what Herzog did and, building it towards the stadium, like you said. And he ended up, convincing the Brewers that they needed to be more of a power hitting team. And you make that quite evident in the book too. And he said, this trade's going to be, good for both of us and put us both in good spots. And boy, what a Nostradamus he was on that. Just, a year or two later, to be meeting each other in the World Series and having a great series at that, very evenly matched. So with two different styles of play.
And definitely the contrasting styles were a big story, and it was super cool. I mean, the Cardinals were built on defense and running, and the Brewers just bludgeoned people. I mean, they just did it. I mean, that was Harvey's wall bangers. They had the top 3 guys in the American League in hits on the same team, which is insane. I mean, just to think about that now, I mean, but, those guys could absolutely mash the ball. And they, they could hit for power and obviously had guys who could hit for average as well at the top of the lineup with Cooper and Youn and Molly. That was a really, really fun Brewers team. And there's, I mean, at the end of the season, there's 5 Hall of Famers on that Brewers team. When they added Sutton toward the end of the year. So that's pretty impressive.
So you have 5 on there, and the Cardinals were no slouches either. They had a few Hall of Famers on them and had a pretty good team as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you got Suter, I mean, Suter was so dominant at that point that, I mean, the game's pretty much over when he came in. And they had a lot of talent as well. But they also had, I mean, and obviously Ozzie at shortstop, and that was another big story about how he even got to St. Louis in the first place with the whole, if you look back to 1981 and what happened with Gary Templeton with the incident on, I don't know, was it Mother's Day or something? It was something where they were, it was a salute to women of some sort. And he, as Whitey said, grabbed the family jewels and gave him a good jostling in reaction to to being booed. And, he kind of became persona non grata after that, and they kind of had to trade him. And so they traded. But I mean, Gary Templeton was a phenomenal player at the time. And it had 100 hits from each side of the plate a couple of years earlier. They traded him to San Diego for Ozzie, and Ozzie wanted a new contract. And so this whole thing dragged out. But they end up getting Ozzie, and that was. But Ozzie was exactly the kind of player that Whitey Herzog wanted. He wanted somebody up the middle who would make all the plays, and he kind of didn't care what he hit because he had other guys around him who could hit. And he said, I want a shortstop who can play defense, especially on AstroTurf, especially in this ballpark. And obviously, it worked out.
Yeah. Boy, both those players, Templeton and Ozzie, were just tremendous in their own skill sets and legends of the game. That's for sure. I'm sure Whitey Herzog wasn't real popular the day that trade first went down. If you were a Cardinals fan, you're like, what are you doing? You're giving away our best guy. And,
Yeah.
Not realizing what you're getting back in return. But Herzog had the foresight to realize the talent of Ozzie Smith and what he could bring to the team. So, pretty amazing story there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, it was a perfect fit for Whitey's team. And, I think it was 1980. He set the record for assists at shortstop that I believe still stands. And so, Whitey was, kind of a defense first guy, at least up the middle, right? And so he has, he's got Ozzie and he's got David Green in the outfield, who, was his guy. I mean, he was the centerpiece of the deal that sent Simmons and Vukovic and Fingers to Milwaukee, and everyone thought that he was going to be, a superstar. And unfortunately, that didn't pan out. But then he ends up getting hurt, and lo and behold, the Cardinals call up another guy that Whitey stole, and that was Willie McGee, who they traded. They got from the Yankees for Bob Sykes, and Willie McGee ends up coming up and playing center field, and ends up winning an MVP and a batting title a couple of years later, and was also had a key contributor to the postseason, and over the course of the regular season was just another great player who was mired in that Yankees organization where Steinbrenner just never called anybody up. He was always going out and signing the big name free agents and trading minor leaguers like Willie McGee for pieces like Bob Sykes, who ended up basically doing nothing for the Yankees. And Willie McGee turns into, like I said, a future batting title and an MVP, batting champion, I should say.
And pretty good set of wheels on him as well. If
yes,
I remember
exactly.
correctly. So he's always a threat on the bases. I think almost everybody on that Cardinals team was a threat there in the early 80s. Not a catcher's the best friend on the opposition, that's for sure.
Definitely not.
How did the season go for both these teams? Were they like jumping out on everybody right out of the gate, or how this goes? There's some.
Well, the Cardinals jumped out pretty strong, but I mean, of course, the Braves began the season 13-0. And they kind of came out of nowhere. And then the Cardinals, I think, lost their first game, and then they won 10 or 12 in a row, something like that. And then, they were kind of, but I mean, the Phillies were still really a factor at that point, because the Phillies still had Pete. They still obviously had Schmidt. Carlton won his fourth and final Cy Young in 1982. So the Phillies were a factor. The Expos were the consensus pick to win the National League East. And it just didn't work out for them. Tim Raines had some off the field issues. And they just the Expos just couldn't put it together for whatever reason. And so, but the Cardinals were kind of always there battling the Phillies basically for the second half of the season. And then in the American League, I mean, the Brewers had made the postseason for the first time ever in 1981 with the split season and that weird janky playoff system that they had. And they looked like they were going to make some noise in 81, and they really stumbled with Buck Rogers at the helm. And Buck had not he had kind of alienated some of the guys on the team, and there were rumblings, and they ended up firing Buck Rogers and bringing in and just bumping up Harvey Keene. And that was the catalyst for their complete turnaround. I mean, and, you look at what happened with the Phillies last year, right? I mean, when the Phillies let Joe Girardi go, I thought, oh, well, Joe Girardi isn't the reason that they were making a bunch of errors. And, but then all of a sudden, as soon as they changed managers, things completely changed. And the exact same thing happened in 82 with the Brewers. And they just, basically, they all relaxed. Buck ran kind of a tight ship. And I think I told a story in the book about how, contrast that to Harvey Keene, who had a fake leg, and sometimes guys would steal it when he was in the shower. He'd, come out of the shower and his leg was missing. So it just kind of changed the dynamic of the clubhouse. Everybody relaxed, and they started doing what they were capable of doing, and really took off once Keene took over.
Yeah, I guess that's definitely true. And maybe I better clarify this for listeners that are saying, how are the Brewers playing the Cardinals when they're both in the National League? Well, way back a long time ago, friends, the Brewers were an American League team, and I believe, what was it, early 2000s when they made the switch over?
Yeah, and they switched with the Astros because the Astros were in the NL West at the time.
That's right. So yes, the Brewers were definitely an American League team back in the day. I still think of them as American League team. It's hard for me to think
Absolutely.
otherwise. So and vice versa with the Astros. So I get confused myself sometimes. But definitely some great teams and very interesting the way that they both progressed in there. Now, when these two teams met, you pointed out very vividly, which something I didn't realize. Maybe at the time I did, but maybe I forgot about that. The Cardinals were the team with the least amount of home runs, and it was exactly the opposite. The Brewers were right up near the top of home runs for the year of 1982. So just the contrast, the styles. I mean, that's probably the biggest number you could look at to see the contrast of these two clubs.
Yeah, and it really was. I mean, that was the big story of which style was better. I mean, which team. And the Brewers had their pitching wasn't quite as good as the Cardinals pitching. I mean, the Cardinals had Bob Forsch and Joaquin Andujar. But when the Brewers ended up getting Don Sutton for the stretch run, that was really a big boost to them. He was still a really effective pitcher at the time, and won some really key games for them, including one on the last day of the season that actually got them into the playoffs in the first place. So, and that was that was a really exciting game. I remember because that was during the NFL strike too. So all of a sudden, Major League Baseball takes center stage on a Sunday afternoon in October. And it was a huge, huge deal. I mean, for that game, I mean, it was, the winner take all on the last day of the season when there was no wild card and there was, nothing else. It was just, win or or go home.
Yeah, just like a perfectly written drama to take you right to the last day and have those little fireworks to get them through there. That's some pretty exciting stuff too. Okay, so did the each team play in their respective playoff series in the AL and the NL that year?
So the Cardinals beat the Atlanta Braves, and the Braves had been awful for many, many years and kind of came out of nowhere and won the National League West in 1982. And the Braves ended up getting swept, but the sort of asterisk to that is that Atlanta had Phil Niekro on the mound in game 1 of the NLCS, and they had a lead in the 5th inning, and the skies opened up and the game ended up getting rained out. So it didn't count. So then they went back and had to replay game 1, and the Cardinals ended up winning the series. And then the Brewers and the Angels had a phenomenal. I mean, this again back in '82. It's a 5-game. It's best of 5 ALCS and NLCS. And so the Brewers and Angels, the Angels jumped out to a 2-0 lead, and everyone thought, okay, well they only have to win one more game, so they're going to go to the World Series, and it's going to be the Angels and the Brewers ended up pulling it out, in game 5 with a tremendously exciting victory. And I'm sure still smarts for a lot of Angels fans. I know it's still smarts for Doug DeCinces about some decisions that were made in that game that came from the dugout. And so the Brewers ended up winning that series and going to the World Series to take on the Cardinals. And then that series goes 7 as well. So.
Yeah, so as long as you bring it up, a good segue into it. Let's talk our way through those games, if you will. How did each game go to get to game 7?
Well, the Brewers won game 1. I think they won 10-0. And Molitor had 5 hits, and then the Cardinals bounced back. To be honest with you, I don't remember exactly who won each game in sequence, but the Cardinals were down 3-2 after 5, and it looked like the Brewers had the momentum going, and the Cardinals ended up winning game 6. And so then it goes to a game 7 and in St. Louis, and Joaquin Andujar was pitching, and he had gotten hurt in his previous start, so there was doubt as to whether or not he was even going to be able to go. But as Joaquin Andujar was fond of saying, "Me one tough Dominican," and so he ended up gutting it out and pitched really, really well in game 7. But the undercurrent of that entire series was the fact that these were two teams that had 2 of the best closers in baseball at the time, if not the best 2 closers in baseball at the time. But Raleigh Fingers was unavailable because he had blown out his elbow in September. And so they kept having these shots of fingers in the dugout, and people were saying, well, is he going to be available? Is he not going to be available? But, the Brewers knew that he was done, and he ended up throwing a few innings in 83 and missed the rest of the season and was kind of never the same after that. And the same with Pete Vukovich. We found out later on that he was pitching with a torn rotator cuff for all of September and was pretty much finished after 82 as well. So but there was still a lot of back and forth with each of these teams. And again, which style prevails was the big question. And again, it went, anytime a series goes 7 games, it's going to be exciting, and you're going to kind of be on the edge of your seat for the entirety of it. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great series. All the games are available on YouTube. You can go back and watch them now. And that's one of the things I did to do the book, was try to weave the narrative, because again, I'm not breaking news by telling people who won the World Series in 82. So I have to go back and mix in newspaper accounts with quotes, with pulling stuff from the broadcast and pulling, I bought the St. Louis Cardinals 1982 Celebrate vinyl EP that was put out by KMOX, and ended up having a friend of mine who owns a radio station here dump it down to CD so that I could listen to it again, and pulled stuff from that, and so it's all about trying to put people in that situation where you say, okay, well, this person said this. It's weaving that sort of the soundbite narrative of telling a story with just from telling it from the perspective of the people who were there.
Yeah, you definitely did that. And I was just going to mention that, throughout the book, especially these big games in the AL and the NL playoff and the World Series itself, you really brought those quotes in, and you could tell you were doing some digging and find them in a newspaper, and very relative to whatever you were talking about, the subject matter you were talking about at the time, whether it be a player, how he performed. You have a post-game interview. But the thing that really brought me back is when you were talking, the color commentary from the announcers doing the game. I believe NBC, what you just had on there, but Keith Jackson and Joe Garagiola, and I could just hear them saying these words that I'm reading, and it really took me back, 40 years ago. It's hard to believe 40 years ago, but it took me back about 40 some years ago. To watch
those are the voices we grew up with,
right?
With Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek, and the World Series was on ABC with Keith Jackson and Jim Palmer and Earl Weaver in the booth. And it was, and Weaver, of course, retired at the end of 82. He came back later, but so, it was one of the things that has always stood out to me about those TV calls was Mike Caldwell was pitching for the Brewers, and Jim Palmer said that he was talking to the Brewers pitching coach, Cal McClish, and McClish said, if Caldwell throws harder than 85, he's overthrowing. And contrast that to what we see today, right? Where, everybody throws 95. That's kind of at the bottom level. And so that really was a big anachronism for me, but also kind of just really interesting, and shows how the game has changed, and about how you could throw 85, but if you could put it where you wanted to, that was a way to get hitters out then. And I'm not going to be the get off my lawn guy. But I just think it was really, it was interesting, and showed how the game was so different then than it is now.
That's definitely for sure. Now, I thought it was really interesting. It made me go back and think about this, and maybe I didn't realize this at the time either. But when you had Palmer and Weaver as the color commentary and the analysts on the broadcast, I'm sitting there thinking, God, it was only 3 years earlier that they were with Baltimore playing the Pirates in the 79 World Series, which is so they're not that far removed from the game at that point, when Weaver just was managing just the season before, I believe, too. So,
Weaver managed in 82, and Palmer pitched in 82. Weaver's last year was there. And then of course Cosell was in the booth as well. And Howard is, regardless of what you think of Howard, he was always entertaining.
Oh, I loved him. Especially, I always remember him from the Muhammad Ali days and the Monday Night Football days. But he was great at no matter what he did. He had his own style and very interesting character. That's for sure. All right, let's take this opportunity again, Jay, to tell people the name of the book and again where they can find it.
So the title of the book is Suds series, and it's about the 1982 season. You can get it obviously on Amazon. contact your local bookseller. If funds are tight, contact your local library. Ask them to purchase it for you, and then you just put it on reserve and read it that way. It's available, and it's also available on the University of Missouri Press's website as well. And then if you go to my website, 80sbaseball.com, there's a link right on the homepage that'll take you to a place where you can buy it as well. So lots of places that you can get it.
Okay, great. Well, I was going to be one of my next questions was talking about your website. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what people can expect on 80sbaseball.com?
Well, I mean, again, it's a passion project for me. And I actually, when I started to do my first book, I started the website as a companion to that. And one of the things that I've always been interested is, what happened on this day in history. And so that's a big component of the website. So I have, if you were to go in and type in 80sbaseball.com /, and whatever today's date is, you could pull up all the things that happen. I do player transactions, birthdays. Unfortunately, we're in that realm now where guys are starting to pass away. We're losing people. And once the season starts, who had a big day, who hit 3 home runs, who threw a no-hitter, trades, when guys get released, fights, managerial changes, all those kinds of things. So it's kind of a little history capsule for each day. But then in addition, I also write individual blog posts as well, just about stuff that I find interesting, or I've recently done some stuff with other authors who have allowed me to excerpt parts of their books as well, which is a lot of fun. So I can help other people promote their books, and hopefully get the word out about it. I mean, I've been lucky that I've been able to build a platform by doing this, and it's a lot of fun. And so I want to help people out and maybe expose other people who know who I am, but might not know who, some of these other authors are. But, hey, here's a part of what they wrote. And then I also have a companion Facebook page as well. And then I'm on Twitter at JDaniel2033. So it's all kind of interspersed on my Twitter feed. I talk about everything, not just the 80s, but 80s and 90s, and, Babe Ruth and whatever else I find interesting. And again, a lot of pop culture stuff as well in 1980 or for the 80s.
Well, fantastic. We will share as much of that as we can on getting into the show notes of this podcast and on jerseydispatch.com for the accompanying article with this. And we'll have a little write-up for you on you, so people know a little bit more about you too, sort of some of the information you have on your dust jacket and stuff like that. So and we'll point your way to the 80sbaseball.com as well. So Jay, we really appreciate you coming on here. Appreciate you and Missouri, University of Missouri Press of sending the book and letting me get a read on it. And so I can have a great conversation with you. And I really enjoyed it and enjoyed the book. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Darren. I appreciate it. And a big shout out to the University of Missouri Press as well. They've been fantastic to work with. Everybody that I've worked with has been great. So I really appreciate their help in all this.
Sorry, but my pitching coach just called timeout and he's coming out to the mound. I think I'm going to get yanked for a reliever. We'll see you back tomorrow for some more great sports history on Sports Jersey Dispatch Podcast. We invite you to check out our websites, jerseydispatch.com and pigskindispatch.com. Not only see the daily sports history, but to experience the preservation of great events and people that play the games. Find us on Pigskin Dispatch. It's also on social media outlets of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all your daily sports history. Pigskin Dispatch is happy to be associated with the Sports History Network, the sports headquarters of yesteryear, found at sportshistorynetwork.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football, here on the Sports History Network. I'm very pleased to announce that I will be partnering with the Sports History Network to give away 2 copies of my latest book called Bears vs. Cardinals, the NFL's Oldest Rivalry. To enter, just head over to the following link, sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. We hope you'll enjoy the numerous stories in the book, which is largely based on the newly released Dutch Tournament collection at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Dutch was the co-owner of the early Chicago Bears with George Halas and kept correspondence, financial records, and scouting reports, which now allow us to peek into the management of an NFL club during the first few years of the league's existence. Along the way, we'll meet unusual gridiron characters from years gone by, including a quarterback who could throw the ball farther behind his back than he could throwing it forward, a Bears lineman who was such a good tavern fighter that he decided to enter the boxing universe, and a Cardinals halfback who gave up the NFL rushing title by deciding to not show up for his team's final game of the season. And can we forget the time the Al Capone mob interrupted a Bears-Cardinals game? The new book was fun to research, and I hope you will enter our free contest today. Once the winners are selected, we'll be in touch regarding shipping as well as to inscribe the book personally for you. This might make a perfect gift for Mother's or Father's Day, or simply add it to your own personal collection. Once again, enter by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. Thank you and good luck.